Hello and welcome to my presentation on upper cross syndrome. So the upper cross syndrome is a posture type which is characterised with a rounding of the shoulders and a forward head position. Very common amongst people that work in offices or spend a lot of time driving, or the dreaded texter's neck. So what we're going to discuss today is what causes upper cross, what muscles are involved, and how we might go about fixing it. So, as I said earlier, you'd see it with those rounding of the shoulders and that forward head position, creating that rounded spine and that chin poke. Now, let's have a look at the muscles at the front. We're looking at pectoralis major and pectoralis minor. As we know, they're the big pushing muscles at the front of the chest in the case of pec major, and then pec minor, which sits underneath the clavicle and attaches onto the back of the scapula and then onto the ribs. This muscle is really important because it pulls the shoulder blade forwards. You might have seen on some people the shoulder blades even wing a little bit, they pop up at the back, and that's in part due to that tightness in pectoralis minor. If we look at our cross itself, we'll see that some muscles are tight, some muscles are weak. So we've got tight pecs, as we've already mentioned. So if something's tight, something on the other side of the body has to be weak. All of our muscles work in pairs. So pecs are tight. At the back of the body then, we've got weak rhomboids and weak lower trapezius. So the rhomboids, which sit in between the shoulder blades and squeeze them together, they're being put on a stretch now because those shoulder blades are rounding apart. And lower trapezius, which keep the shoulder blades flat and down in this position, they are weak as well because those shoulder blades are starting to lift up and being pulled round. So that's the lower half of our cross. Tight pecs, weak rhomboids and lower trapezius. We might as well on this side, we could also put weak infraspinatus, because that sits around the back of the shoulder blades, is our rotator cuff, which does that movement, and quite often, as well as just the shoulders being pulled forwards, you'll see that turning in of the hand being pulled round into that position. So if that's weak, what's tight? Well, quite often lats can be very tight as well. Tight, and you might even feel it if you're doing massage on palpation, because the lats, although they're a muscle round the back, they insert round the front. So they sort of twist and insert closer to the front near the bicep, and they can create that inward rotation as well. So this emphasizes the importance of keeping those back muscles strong. If you think big pectorals, big lats, all massive muscle groups pulling everything forwards, then we need to make sure that those rhomboids and lower traps are as strong as possible to keep that posture good. So that's our lower part of our cross. If we now move up towards the head and we get this chin poke, we've got weakness at the front of the neck in the deep neck flexors. So these flexors aren't pulling the chin in, they're weak, the chin's poking forwards. Which means, what's tight? So if we've got weakness here, must be tight at the back. In this case, levator scapulae, which goes from the corner of the scapula into the neck. And its job is to shrug those shoulders up. So they pull the scapula up, but because they're tight, they're pulling those shoulders forward. These are weak, the chin's going forwards. Now upper traps quite often with people in this chin poke position, they'll be really tender, but they're not always tight. You might see that sometimes they're tight if the shoulders are right up here, but sometimes they're quite taut. They're being pulled taut by this forward chin poke. And they should be treated as a weak muscle rather than a tight muscle in some cases. So those are the muscles that are involved. What happens if someone has got upper cross? What are the repercussions? Well, quite often there's a lot of stiffness, tenderness, pain or discomfort around the neck, because if we think of our chin poke position, we haven't got much movement once the head's in a protracted position. Once we retract, extending the neck up, we've got lovely full rotation. So it can cause stiffness and pain, lack of range of movement in the neck. And quite often I find that's a really nice marker with clients as a predisposing test. See what rotation they've got. If it's poor, then that could be an indication of lower cross as well as the obvious posture position. Once you treat them, redo the test, is the movement back? Now, looking at the skeletal structure through the upper body, if we think of the shoulders formed by the clavicle meeting the acromion at the back of the scapula, once the shoulders rolled forwards, in our upper cross syndrome, the acromion's rolled forwards, that really closes down that joint space for that ball and socket joint. And you'll actually find that once the shoulders forwards, you try and lift your arm over your head, it's a real struggle, doesn't want to go. And that's because that ball, the head of the humerus, is ramming into the acromion. Now this ramming of the ball into the acromion means that things are going to get caught up in there. Things like our supraspinatus muscle, that rotator cuff that sits on the top, the supraspinatus tendon, and the bursa of supraspinatus can all get caught. They get caught in there, they get irritable, they get inflamed, they don't like it, and then that causes what we term shoulder impingement syndrome, which is very uncomfortable, lots of pain on overhead movements. As well as that, we can get things like shoulder instability, again that forward shoulder position, the scapula then moves in a less efficient way, and that can lead to other overuse injuries. So our other overuse injuries might even be down at the elbow, things like tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, can be because that shoulder's in a forward position and then the elbow joint has to do more movement to replicate tasks. So it just means that the elbow's in a less stable position as well. Right, so how do we go about treating it? So we know we've got weak muscles and tight muscles. If something is weak, we strengthen it. If it's tight, we lengthen it. So lengthen it could be with our massage treatments, it could be stretching. So if we take pecs for an example, we might do a pec release. Certainly I find pec release really effective on pectoralis minor. So find that trigger point in there where they're really tight and sore. Hold, apply pressure. They'll hate you for it because it is really uncomfortable in there on people that have got upper cross. And then get them to pull the shoulders back so you're stretching out. Or because pectoralis minor is a breathing muscle and inserts on the ribs, so helps lift the chest, find that point, trigger point, deep breath in, and then release that way. Pectoralis major, classic pec stretch, pushing arm against a door frame, rotating round, opening up through the chest, holding, and then increasing, minimum of 30 seconds. Now, weakness, we strengthen. So if we're going to strengthen our rhomboids and our lower traps, it's all about those pulling movements. You'll see with plenty of people who lift a lot of weights, perhaps haven't quite got the balance right between muscles that push and muscles that pull. If they're doing too much bench press and not enough pulling movements, they might end up in that posture. So plenty of rows and other pulling movements. If people don't have an access to a gym, then things like the dart, which is a Pilates exercise, lying on your front, pulling the shoulders back, lifting the hands, so it's all squeezing those shoulder blades back into position. That, and of course posture re-education, make people aware that they need to get into that position. With our weak neck flexors, plenty of chin tucks, holding and releasing. Tight Lev Scap, again, really nice place to trigger point release. So find the spot, apply pressure, get them to bring ear to shoulder, stretch it all out. And those treatments really do work for this upper cross syndrome. Even if we can just get them into more comfortable positions so that they can get that sort of range of movement back. And then once they're moving it more, a lot of that pain will go away just by getting movement into these areas. Thank you.